Welcome to FO Talks. FO Talks is brought to you by Fair Observer, a platform for citizen journalism with over 2,500 contributors from 90 different countries. And we would love you to join the conversation. So please do sign up for our newsletter, follow us online, and subscribe to our channel. We're joined today by Esther Wojcicki, who is a journalist and educator, world-renowned. She's the mother of three incredibly successful daughters, Susan, who's the CEO of YouTube, Anne, who founded 23andMe, and Janet, who's a professor of pediatrics at the University of California. She's the author of How to Raise Successful People. She's been a teacher at Palo Alto High School for over 30 years. And she's also the founder of an app called Tract, which lets students be the CEO of their own education. We're delighted to have you with us today. So thank you so much for joining us, Esther. And everybody else, we would love you to get involved. So please do send in your questions. You can do that either on Zoom or on Facebook. And after Esther's 15-minute presentation, we'll put those questions to her. But for now, Esther, welcome, and please do take over.
So thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really honored to be here. And what I'm going to be talking to you about basically is education and how I think it should change for the 21st century, especially today because of the COVID pandemic. And so one of the main ways that I think kids are suffering, and a lot of them are suffering, is because there is very little social interaction. The main thing that kids are missing is their friends. And they don't really miss being lectured to. They don't really miss the teacher, sorry to say, even though I'm a teacher, I know that. They miss being with their friends. And one of the biggest problems is that Zoom calls and even Google Meet calls, actually all the social media calls, have the facility for the teacher to mute everybody. And that's exactly what they do. They mute everybody. So this gets rid of the main motivation for kids to go to class, because the main reason they want to go to class is to be with their friends. So one thing that I suggest and that I have done in my classes is that I have given the kids an opportunity to be the leader at the Zoom call. So when they're the leader, everybody wants to come because they want to see who's the leader and what they're going to be doing, and nobody's muted. So it gives them an opportunity to interact. And while that might be a little bit chaotic, it's very effective because it heightens the interest and the passion for learning. So that's one thing that I would like to suggest, is giving kids that opportunity to be in charge of the Zoom call. That means they have to plan for it. And that means they have to also think about what they think other kids will like for it. It gives them not only an opportunity to plan, but leadership skills. That's what kids need today, is an opportunity to be in charge and to have leadership skills. So the statistics on depression are pretty overwhelming. It's probably easier to say how many kids are not depressed. It looks like it's about 20% of the kids seem to be coping pretty well. And then another 10% are marginal. And that means that about 70% of the kids are depressed and they don't know what to do. They're really upset about not being able to go to school. And a lot of the schools, promised them that they were going to be able to come back in this semester. Now, actually, I'm sitting in front of Stanford University. That's where I'm located. And I would like to unfortunately say that Stanford was among the schools that also canceled all the classes for the spring semester. And the kids are really upset about it. And I can understand why, because I think that of course, the death rate from COVID among very young people is 1%. And, they do get sick, but then they recover. But I mean, I think that with our numbers, over 400,000 people in the US today who have died, this is what scares everybody and the leaders. So that's the first thing I'd like to talk about is the mental health. Second thing I'd like to talk about also is my book. My book is called How to Raise Successful People, Simple Lessons for Radical Results. And the simple lessons are basically encapsulated in an acronym, which I call TRICK. And I developed that so that people can hopefully remember it easily. And TRICK stands for trust, respect, independence, collaboration, and kindness. And I say that this belongs not only in the classroom between teacher and student, but also be in the home with parents. This is really important because parents, while you might not think of yourself this way, parents are the child's first teacher. And the habits that you establish as a parent are the habits that continue for a lifetime. And you teach your child for the first 5 years, and then that child goes off to school. And a lot of the behavior patterns that they've established come from the home. So one of the things that I talk about is trust. I start with trust is probably the most important. Trust is giving your child a sense of trust, letting them do things that might be just a little bit challenging for them. Let them help out around the house. And most parents will say, oh, I don't know about that. Not sure my kids can do that. But why don't you give them the opportunity to try? If you read the book, you'll see that that's what I used to raise my daughters. I didn't have any nannies or help. So I just looked at them for help. And it was kind of crazy, but they could do it even when they were 2 years old. And for example, well, fortunately today you don't have to do this, but they even learn to fold diapers. And they learn folding. That was a skill. A lot of people don't know how to fold. And so they learned to do that. They also learned how to set the table. They learned how to serve things. Well, the things that they were serving were not things that were really dangerous, so they could serve anything that didn't really create a catastrophe. So it wasn't liquid. It was anything but liquid. They could, like, cereal or salad or fruit. And what that did is it gave them the byproduct of feeling really competent, really good about themselves. And I just continued to build on that skill.
Just ask, how does that feed into our digital education? Is that something that can, I don't know, somehow be useful in a digital classroom? Is that something that teachers can impart in children?
Yes. So that is actually, so I was doing it with toddlers. I'm giving you the idea for how to do it with toddlers and small children. But digital education, one of the things that you can transfer this to is, like, you have a small child, 2 to 5 or over 5, in the digital world. How can you empower that child in the digital world? So one of the ways that you can do that is collaborate with them. That's part of the trick model. Collaborate with them on picking what it is that they should be doing. They will love the fact that you are interested in their opinion and that you are interested in pleasing them. So the collaboration part is really important, and giving kids and trusting them. So that's where it goes. You trust them, you respect their ideas, you give them some independence, you collaborate with them, and when they make a mistake, you treat them with kindness. And so in a digital world where we all are today, how do we cope with decisions about what you can do online? And collaboration is the key. And I know that a lot of parents, in fact, they don't collaborate, they dictate. And that creates a sense of animosity and a sense of, oh, let me see what I can get around my parents' statements or their rules. And you don't want that to happen. You want them to work with you, not be in a situation where they're always, when they're not being trusted and when they're doing things that you don't want. So, as I was saying back at the beginning of the talk, the habits that you establish when they're little carry along to when they're teenagers. And when they're teenagers, that's when they're actually really empowered. They're like adults, but they still have the mind of a child. And because they're not that, they're like 14, 15, whatever. And so if you've established this trust and respect early on, and this ability to collaborate early on, they will talk to you and they will tell you about what they want to do. And in a digital world, I cannot tell you how important that is. And you want them to be able to talk to you about what they want to do and what they find online. Maybe they met somebody online that was not a person that you want them to meet. What do you do about it then if they don't share? You know, you want them to always be willing to share. And my daughters, I tried this out on my daughters, by the way, just so you know, they always told me what they were doing, even if it was bad. And it was because I didn't get mad right away. I basically listened and I said, okay, let's see how we can solve this problem. Let's see what we can do. So I was part of the team as opposed to being part of an adversary. So I think that is something in the digital world that is really important for parents to think about.
Mm. And
So
just a couple of points that have been raised by teachers who are listening to you. And that's really, obviously, it's a little bit easier, I think, in a small group when you're talking about your own children. But how do you trust a big group of children online? It's very difficult, this transition from a traditional classroom to an online classroom. How do you do it in reality? Don't you have to instill a little bit of order?
so giving kids trust and respect doesn't mean you get rid of the order. It's very important to know that. So you're still in charge. You're in charge of the classroom. You're the teacher. But what you're doing is delegating and giving kids an opportunity to participate as leaders. So, how do you do it? I'll just give you an example of what I did in class. Okay, so this is an in class situation. In class, I gave kids, they would come into class, and then I gave them one student, it was usually per week, that got to take roll. They got to do the important things. Roll isn't considered an important thing in all schools, because schools get paid by the number of students that come. Then they also got to help me plan what it was that we were doing that week. We had a plan for the week. What could they do? You can do the same thing online. You can talk to your students and give them an opportunity to say what they think is important, what should be discussed this week. And it can be anything. If you're talking about a social studies class, what should we be talking about? This is the topic for the week. How do you think we should be moving forward with that? If it's an English class, it's the same thing, okay, with a book or whatever it is you're reading. How does that relate in some way? I think it's a little bit trickier with math um, when you're teaching a math class because it's a skill. And you need to understand the theorems behind it, the logic behind it, and the teacher really needs to be in charge. But I would put them in charge of working with their peers and having them and their peers talk about how it is that they're working on whatever problem it is. Science is also, it's more driven by the teacher lecturing, but still there should be always an opportunity to put the kid in a position of asking them their thoughts, their opinions, what do they want to do? And in foreign language, we all have those apps online, Duolingo and all of those. So I would include those apps with the foreign language teaching as opposed to taking the responsibility for you as the teacher, always teaching it. Have them go out, find the apps that they like, coordinate with each other in the class, and practice together. Um, and I've taught French also, so I know that this is possible. And I think it's actually better, because if they put it on their phone and they practice all the time, and then you have sort of a gamification of it, of like who knows the most words or what does this mean, it makes it more exciting for the kids. So what the average teacher does, and I sympathize because I've been in a classroom forever, um, is they take control of all of exactly what's going to be happening in the class. And so in that control, what I would say is give kids an opportunity to also have some control, also participate, also say what they think and do what they think, even if it all sounds like it's chaos. And but in chaos, if you go into a party, it looks like chaos, doesn't it? And everybody's happy being there. And if you went into my classrooms, you would see it was chaos too. It was like they're all talking to each other, but what they're talking about matters to them. And I was producing a newspaper and a magazine, and they were talking about how to do the paper, or what are some of the ideas for the stories, or what are your problems who are you interviewing, and what kind of problems are you having? So it all worked. It works to the benefit of everybody. And so that's part of what I would allow for more of that online, in a digitized world. So Zoom has all these breakout rooms, and I'd put them in the breakout room. And you don't have to monitor every single breakout room. And I know teachers feel like it's essential, but no, let them work it out. Let them do it, and let them come back to the big group and say what they did in the breakout room. So that's one of the ways that I think is really important, to work with this trick philosophy in the digitized world. Trust and respect them, give them independence, collaborate with them on what is going to be happening. And of course, they're going to make mistakes. If they didn't make mistakes, they wouldn't be in school. I mean, school is a place to make mistakes
Right.
and then learn. And so that's why you need to treat them with kindness. It's really important to do that.
Now, you've called for this digital revolution in the classroom. Way before COVID hit, you were calling for it. So, do you think that actually, although it's been very painful for a lot of schools, it's actually been a good process?
So I think the advantage of COVID has it's disrupted education completely. And in order to make change, you actually have to disrupt a system, because otherwise tradition is just too powerful. People keep doing the same thing even though it doesn't work. And so now, because of this disruption, we have an opportunity to rethink what we're doing. And what I would like to suggest when we go back to the pre-digital world or pre-COVID world, I would like to suggest giving kids more control. Everybody calls it personalized education. And, a lot of the personalized education has been too standardized. It's like personalized, you have choice of group A, B, or C. Personalized means that in my book, it's giving kids an opportunity to find things that they personally think are important in that subject that you're teaching, and bring that to class. And so, yes, I do think it's going to make a huge difference. And yeah, if anybody has questions, I would be happy to answer questions. I see there's one here. Um, it
I've got
says, isn't this method a version of project-based learning? Yes, this is a version of project-based learning. You're absolutely right. And that's what I am. I'm trying to say, we can do project-based learning digitally, and it's much more effective than sitting there and listening to somebody talk. And, while I'd like to think of myself as like super engaging, I know for a fact that after 5 minutes of listening to me, everybody's like, oh my God, what's the next thing on the agenda? And so, yes, I think we need to use project-based learning, have them do something at home that's a project of some kind together with their friends, peers. Also, the other thing I suggest and I know this goes against the tradition, I let them pick their own group. And why do I do that? It's because, if I were in the class, I'd want to pick my friend and my group. So why not let them do it? And I would still give them the same outcome. In other words, the same assessment. We want to make sure that you're actually doing this and not just playing around. And I find that when you trust kids, it's amazing. They rise to the occasion. It's kind of shocking to think that's true, but it is.
I've got a question here from Joanna Carter, who's a secondary school teacher in London. I know she teaches at an inner city school, and she's also asking about project-based learning. She says, in my experience, children need a base of knowledge before they can embark on those kind of projects. She's not saying it doesn't work, but it does take a lot more time. And with disadvantaged kids, you've got to weigh that up with the opportunity cost. It's a luxury that can be done once you've taught the important information first. What's your view on that?
So my view on that is she's right. They can't do it without a base. So you have to explain to them let me tell you what's coming. You're going to be able to work with whatever the name of the friend is. But first, we have a few days or a few weeks of me giving you the basis of how to do it. And once you understand the basis, then you can do it. So what we tend to do is not explain the why. We as teachers need to do more why training for kids. Why are we doing this? Why is it important? And usually the answer in many cases, I remember getting this myself when I was a student, you're doing this because it's on the test on Friday. And if you don't do it, you're not going to pass. So if we can explain it a little bit more, I don't, in context, politely, we're doing this now because what I'm going to do is give you ability to do it yourself with X, Y friend, and you need the background for that.
Mm.
And so that's part of what I talk about. When I teach beginning journalism, um, it's very interesting for me to see that the kids come into the classes. They haven't had a program at all. They come into the class and they expect me to tell them what to do all the time. They just sit there and wait for instructions. And when I say, I want you to come up with your own idea for a feature story, they're just at a total loss. They're like, well, can't you give us three choices? It's like, no, I'm not going to give you, you're going to have to do it. So I think this kind of training is important for them to have to take responsibility for some of the things that they're doing and then understand why you're going to work on a feature. And like, I don't know some of the features kids did around here is like, what are the best beaches in Northern California? I said, well, if you're going to do a feature on beaches, you guys have to go to the beach because you cannot have it can't be based on other people's experience because otherwise, why is your story a good story? And then they get really excited about going to the beach. And then they have to tell their parents, we have to go to the beach for this class. So let them come up with their own ideas for stories or whatever they're going to, own ideas of what they're going to read for, an English class or for a history class. Like, how does what's happening today in the world relate to what happened, 20, 30 years ago? What are the factors that are pushing us in this direction? And like, what do you see? I mean, that's a social studies parallel. And
Can I
I'm
just
sorry.
raise another question that's been raised here by Kate Ashley, who's also a teacher here in London? And she said, if everything goes digital and also if kids are allowed so much control of their own education, doesn't that change the way we need to assess them? It's very hard to prepare them for exams if they're learning via a computer game, for instance.
Um, so that is like the $64,000 question. That's it. Because what I said to this guy who controls the PISA test, who lives in Germany, by the way, as I said, you're controlling how everybody learns and what they think and what they're feeling. Because yes, what happens is those assessments control us as teachers. And I think that the assessments here in the United States now, they've been canceled because they say that the kids can't take the test because they haven't been studying all year for it. And the tests need to be altered. They need to be modified. I still think we need to have tests because those help us measure what's going on and whether they've learned what they are supposed to learn. But the tradition embedded in those tests makes it very difficult for us to allow kids to be CEO of their own education because they want to learn a lot of things that are not necessarily on the test. So I think that people in charge of the testing, they need to be willing and able to make changes. And I think it'll probably also happen in the UK because nobody can take tests now because of COVID. And the main thing kids do in class is memorize. And they're not memorizing now. So maybe we should concentrate on thinking instead of memorizing. What do you think?
Well, what would you like to see to replace those sort of tests and exams that obviously we've had for generations now?
Well, I would like to see a lot of the sort of minutia that is tested be removed and giving kids more of an opportunity to talk about projects that they worked on. There is no place on those tests for kids to write about projects that they've done. And those might be subjective and harder to assess and grade because they're not standardized. But I think even if we changed let's say just 20% of the test, or maybe 30% of the test, and allowed kids to write about the projects or the things that they think are important, that would drive the curriculum so that teachers would feel more comfortable in letting kids pursue interests of their own. So I don't think we can get rid of the whole test. There's no way that will ever happen, except maybe this year. So I would just suggest a portion of the test be devoted to the project that you worked on this year. Right now, no one tests for projects at all. And
No.
no one tests for creativity or for collaboration. So, and those are things that we need in the 21st century. We need innovation. And the last century, the 20th century, we needed people to follow instructions and to learn to read. We succeeded. They all follow instructions and they learn to, oh, well, maybe not all of them following, most of them do.
Well, I suppose
So,
that's the question that I was going to ask you. There's obviously a very famous TED talk given by Sir Ken Robinson that's Do Schools Kill Creativity? And in that, he talks about how education is meant to prepare children for this future that we can't even predict what the future is going to be like in 5 years, let alone 20 years. So what,
right.
in your view, are we preparing kids for? What kind of skills do they need?
The main skills they need, number one, is to be able to collaborate. Because before there was not such an emphasis on collaboration. It was obeying instructions. Collaboration, communication, creativity, and critical thinking. Those are the four that I think are the most important of all. And I mean, if people had good critical thinking skills here in America, we never would have had that riot in the Capitol. And I say that riot is an example, a tragic example of the failure of the education system to teach people how to think. And the other thing that's very interesting is, okay, today's January 19th. They blocked Trump from all the social media, I guess a little bit more than a week ago. Do you know there's no fake news? The fake news is gone. And even Fox News has said that fake news, well, they were the number one purveyors of fake news. Even they are saying that there's no fake news.
Wow.
Very interesting, isn't that?
Sounds good news, like good news. We've got a question here from David Pickens, and he's actually on a camera. So, David, take it away.
No, I was really interested in what you were saying about, the way in which we judge the output of a child's education. I run an audio education service called AudioPie, which creates materials which are designed to inspire students and engage them, which I think is probably much more important than the end of the journey, personally. Now, I actually think we should really reconsider the role of exams in the system and the importance of them. I think, personally, I would go even further than the 30% reduction of emphasis on exams. I'd go to about a third. I would have a third as teacher assessment, because I think it's so important that the role of teachers is valued and is embraced for what it was always intended to be. And finally, I'd have the other third based on this sort of thing that you were alluding to, Esther, with extracurricular things, projects, community engagement, hobbies, anything that is part of your growing as a human, and should be considered. As you rightly say, we should be trying to deliver humans that we've grown over the course of their education. So, and I really do think we've got a golden opportunity to really rethink what we're doing. Whether these people ever embrace that opportunity, I have no idea. I wouldn't say it was very likely. But I think we should try and put something out there really determinedly to say this is a moment where we should rethink what we're doing.
Okay, thanks, David.
I agree 100%. I think the idea is never let a good crisis go to waste. And this is real. I mean, who would have ever dreamed of anything like this ever happening? And I think that we should, I like David's idea of a third being, teacher developed assessment. I always assessed kids using my own assessments. And then I just, so to speak, prayed that they would perform well on the national assessment. And they did. But I never correlated my assessments with those national tests. They were assessments based on what I thought was important. I like the idea of also giving a third to the projects that kids would be in charge of. It'd be the CEO portion, and you'd have to put that, you'd have to describe it. There maybe could be a video, since you're involved in video. I think video is amazing because a lot of the same thinking skills go into creating a good video than that go into creating something in writing, in a written format. So a third would be project, and the other third could be the standardized test that the government likes to give everybody. I think that would be an interesting change. The main takeaway from this pandemic should be a revision of the assessments. If that would happen, that would drive the entire system. Because right now, as we all know, the system is not functioning. It just doesn't work. And the whole world is on Zoom calls. And I'm sorry to say, okay, it works for a conference, it works for us right now. And actually for conferences, I find it is even better in many ways, because I don't have to travel that far. And then I actually get to talk to the people. If the conference is small, I get to actually interact with the people, which I find great. But
so are we preparing our children then for a future in which they'll all be stuck at home looking at a computer screen? Seems a slightly dismal view of the future.
I don't think it's going to be all. I think it's going to be more. So I think there will be more computer screens and more use of computers in the future. But I do think we're all going to get back in person. Human beings are social animals, and we cannot continue like this. So I think we'll all be back in person. But I mean, honestly, it's much easier for me to give a talk to you today via Zoom than before this pandemic. I was literally every week out of 52 weeks of the year, every single week except maybe 3, I was on a plane. And I was traveling all over the world. I mean, my worst commute was I went once from San Francisco to Beijing and then spoke in China and then came back to San Francisco and then flew to Singapore. That was crazy, and it was like, oh my God, I might as well just live on the plane. And then I also did a talk in LA in the morning and then flew to Europe in the afternoon. No, I don't want to do that anymore. It was like my body wasn't happy. I was taking sleeping pills every night because, my body never knew when it was time to sleep. It was just like, okay, I guess I'll have to take a sleeping pill.
I guess
So,
what I'm asking really, especially with you being there in Silicon Valley, really in the thick of it, is if education in the past was based around this model of industrialization and training children to go to school when the bell rings and depart at 5 o'clock when it's all finished. And what are we training children for now? What is the purpose now?
so my purpose, and then also in Silicon Valley, because a lot of people look at my program and me as a leader. My purpose is the 4 C's I just talked about: training kids for innovation, innovation and creativity. So Sir Ken Robinson and I were good, very good friends. And I loved what he said. I was there for that talk he gave. I'll never forget when he gave that talk. I was in the front seat and I didn't know anything about him. And I didn't realize he was so funny. And it was that I thought to myself, my God, this is the world's greatest talk. I just loved it. And I remember going up to him afterward and talking to him about it. And he's absolutely right. Schools kill creativity because they're so focused on following instructions. And he was such a brilliant guy. I miss him all the time, but I'd like to carry on his message and his legacy, and we're working on trying to do something now in his name to try to promote this even further and actually to give teachers more credit for allowing kids to be creative. Also teachers are not seen as the most important people in the whole picture of child rearing, but teachers are the key, and teachers need to be recognized more and compensated more for all the things that they do to make the world a better place, because they do. Teachers are the profession that does it. So, being a teacher, of course, you'll say, oh, of course she says this, but I can see the impact of my teaching. And I think most teachers can do that. And everybody goes into teaching because they care about the world. They all want to make a difference and help kids. And somehow that gets confused here in the US. I don't know about what it's like in the UK, but we have a big dropout rate because teachers get discouraged.
No, absolutely. I also think, though, because you've been making the case for digital education, that does make some teachers defensive, but you're actually in favor of both, I imagine, face-to-face and online learning.
Oh, yeah, you can't do one without the other. I mean, I can tell you that before the pandemic, my classes were a lot online. I mean, a tremendous amount, because we communicated. I had 70 kids in the class, just to know you, one teacher and 70. So the way they worked is in groups, and I had leaders of all the groups. So then I only had to check in with the leaders, but I could send an email to the whole group, and within 10 minutes, I could get them all to change their mind. And it could be at 10 o'clock at night. And, most teenagers don't go to bed, by the way, in case you didn't know. And so that was for me extremely helpful, to be able to use technology to get their writing. I corrected their writing. It was all on Google Docs, so I could see what they were doing. If they were doing presentations, they would do the presentations on Google Presentations. I could see what was coming the next day. So I think we need to have both in person and be supported. We as teachers be supported with technology. And now that we've had too much technology and we're all sick of it, um, I think we can think of ways to use technology to help us in the classroom be more effective and not work as hard. Because, I don't have to work as hard because I delegate a lot of stuff to the kids. And that is what makes a big difference. That's a big difference for me. And it can be, the paper that they put out comes out every 2 to 3 weeks. It's 28 pages. It's a full-size newspaper, the size of the New York Times. And now the kids are all working from home, and they've figured out a system where they can coordinate all their computers and all the tech and everything else so that they can still publish from home in hard copy, though. Can you believe that? In hard copy? So the newspaper is still mailed to all the families. I said maybe it should just be online, but of course I'm not CEO of that, so I let them do what they want.
Okay, just one last question maybe, and then we'll have to probably wrap it up because we're coming to the end of our time with you. A few people have said to me, well, it's all well and good to trust kids if they're responsible. How do you manage if they frankly don't do their projects, or if they just take liberties with the freedom that you give them?
Well, what I did, that happens all the time. So you have to account for it. So one thing that I found is when they're working in group projects, the peer pressure is tremendous. And that really works in my favor to get them to do the project, because the person or the people that they're most interested in pleasing are their peers. And so if they aren't a team player, they get a lot of problems from their peers. But also the other thing, because I know there's kids out there that don't even care about their peers and don't care about anything and just won't do anything. It's harder to do this online, but I had them stay after school. I guess in the digital world, I would just have a one-to-one meeting with them, and I would do it repeatedly. So like every 2 or 3 days, how are you doing? What are you thinking? It's interesting that they responded in person to me. If I talked to them about it and I said explained it and got their input, and I found it was really effective. And I also had them write about it, and I found that to be very effective. So they cannot be allowed to go along and not participate in their group. So I agree with the teachers that are talking about that. They have to. So it just takes more time for you on the part of the teacher. But those kids, they have all kinds of emotional issues for why they're not participating usually. And you can help them work through it. So your role is not only a teacher, but also that of a therapist, and I think most teachers know exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay, Esther, thank you so much for your time and for your insights. Really fascinating to hear. It's nice to hear a more nuanced argument about technology, not just thinking, oh gosh, everything's on Zoom, isn't this dreadful, but actually to hear the benefits that it might bring about in our education system. So thank you for all that.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you for all the teachers that came, or all the people that came. I'm really, really happy to talk to them. And if anybody wants to be in touch with me, so I have a company that we started it's basically putting kids as CEO of their own learning. That's basically what it's called, Tract, TRACT.app. So it's Esther@tract.app, and I'll respond. So especially since, yes, this is a special group.
Yeah, absolutely. And they can also write to us, and we'll put you in touch with them that way if you like. So anyone listening at home, obviously, please do sign up for our newsletter. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on social media, and of course you can write for us at Fair Observer. So please do join us and become a Fair Observer. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you.